As I believe we're all aware, the fencing materials market has been a bit chaotic over the last year and a half. So to try to answer how we got here, where we even are, and when it might get better, I brought on Tony Thornton, who is the executive director of the American Fence Association, to talk about his latest report of the state of the industry for the fence installation industry. Now, this was a pretty long interview. It lasted a little bit over 3 hours. So we actually have cut it down into shorter snippets for each individual segment of the fencing industry. In this segment, Tony talks about the price of wood fence, specifically Western red cedar, and what's going on with the market and when he thinks it might get better. Guys, as always, if you find this content helpful or educational, go ahead and give it a like. Also, did you know that 94% of the people watching this video right now aren't subscribed? That means there's a pretty good chance that you're not subscribed. Take a quick minute and look right below this video. If that button is red, hit subscribe, and when you do, hit that notification bell so that YouTube lets you know each and every week when we have new content available. All right, with all that being said, let's dig in to this week's segment. This is Joe Everest, the fence expert. My family's been perfecting their way of building fence for over 60 years, 3 generations. While there's more than one way to build a fence, I'm here to share with you our way. So Tony, in the Midwest, specifically in Southwest Missouri, our company builds primarily wood. So that's what I'm best versed in is talking about the wood industry. And you want to talk about an industry that's really been hit hard. I mean, I understand they all have, right? But it seems like wood continues to have just problems after problems. What's going on with the wood industry, specifically the wood fencing industry?
Well, let me ask you a question. I'm going to turn this on you. Okay. And I knew that you were primarily wood.
Yeah.
So what challenges have you hit? What type of lead times have you seen? And what are your manufacturers and suppliers kind of telling you? And the reason I'm asking you that is I feel very confident that the bullet points that I have listed here from my peers in the industry are going to line up. But instead of Tony telling us, let's hear from a contractor. Let's hear from a professional in the industry that is challenged with this. And it's going to resonate with, Jason and all the others that are on the call today. And then let's talk about these bullet points that's probably going to kind of bring it all together. So sure. I ask you.
Yeah. So, and to answer the question, I guess I'll back up. So prior to this crazy crisis we're in, the pandemic, if you will, we offered both the treated pine product and a Western red cedar product. So the treated pine was the first to go. So we were dealing in number one grade treated pine. Number one got incredibly expensive, and then in pretty short order just left the fencing market. They started substituting for number two or number two better, and which, the grading process. I mean, it's smart on the wood industry, right, to say, well, number two is almost a number one, but if you compare the two together. A number one and a number two better. And we're not even talking about prime or anything like that. Just number one versus number two better. There's a significant quality difference. There really is, especially from the consumer's perspective, where they're only looking at this thing visually. They're looking at mainly knot holes, right? So number one went away, and number two was substituted for the same price as what number one was being charged for, which is a little bit crazy, right? Because we all know that number two should come at a discount because it's a discount. It's a lower quality board. So you would expect to pay a little bit less. Not the case. And then the price just continued to climb. So to compare where we were paying, a year and a half ago, we were paying around $7.50 or $8 for a number one 4x4x8 pressure treated pine. The prices got up to $15 to $16 for a number two 4x4x8 pressure treated pine. And that kind of made our decision for us that we were done offering treated pine. Just because at that point, when we're talking about post 4x4x8, you're almost to the cost of a steel post at that point.
You're right.
So now we need to talk about value, right? Is the value of this wood post, does it match the quality? Like, is it a good value to the customer? And I really didn't think it was. Not when we could have a steel post for
50 cents more a foot. That was a no-brainer. So we moved away from treated pine and we moved into Western red cedar at roughly the same time the majority of the rest of the industry was.
I had to. Yeah.
It was this way coast to coast.
Exactly.
You were seeing people make these decisions at the same time, which, Tony, is it's interesting to talk about because typically here in the Midwest, we follow the coast when we're talking about building trends or anything like that. There's a lag between East Coast, West Coast, and the Midwest. If we're talking about designs, it's typically a couple years, right?
Yep.
And sometimes it's more fast-paced than that, obviously. But it was surprising to see this all happen pretty much real time, coast to coast and in between.
Absolutely.
Which means that put an incredible strain on the Western red cedar market.
Yep.
I mean, there's only so many mills. Now, why are there only so many mills is probably a conversation to have. A certain mill company, I guess you could say, bought up 2, 3, 4 pretty large mills and closed them down prior to the pandemic. So that could have something to do with this. Just less mills producing means
all of this bills, and I'm seeing some of these comments, and they're spot on, and I've got some answers for you. So it's nice to hear from your perspective as a professional fence contractor that primarily does the wood market. And I'm going to preface this whole conversation about the Western red cedar, especially, and the pressure treated, especially, in the fact that we've got to look at the overall all wood market first. Okay.
Sure.
We got to look at it from that perspective.
Yeah.
And what you're going to see out of this is that the fence industry, okay, if you were to say, okay, where do we line up on the totem pole as far as priority to a mill? We're way down at the bottom.
Well,
okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly the same thing I've heard is, in other episodes, we've talked about profit margin, right?
Yep.
Focus on, as a contractor, you have to focus on what makes you money. So when we're talking about fence materials, from a lumber mill perspective, the fencing cuts are the lower margin cuts, in comparison to building materials, namely, and they've got higher margin cuts to make. So if you're a contractor, if you're a mill, and you have, say, 10 different items, but you can only make 2,
right,
you're going to choose the 2 that have the highest margin. I would.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, those aren't the fence cuts, right? And not that is a very 30,000 foot view on, I think, what's going on.
But that's relevant, and we're going to talk about that. But I want to go back to what I said. We've got to look at the overall wood market as a whole, and we all know that the residential home building, industry right now is at an all-time high. I mean, they build houses in this Dallas-Fort Worth market like, it's like dominoes, boom, 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 and they're done in 90 days to 120 days, and it's already pre-sold. I mean, if you look, out there to try to find a house right now, it's either contingent or it's a contract. I mean, unless you know somebody that's got something behind the scenes, that's how strong the housing market is right now. And throughout the country, the housing market is absolutely exploding. So now that's the first supply. Okay, wood is going to be supplied to that industry way before the fencing guys, and then everything in between. And I'm gonna speak to what you just said. Okay, if there's a Western red cedar mill, okay, that has the capability of cutting up all types of different sizes, shapes, and lengths, okay, they're going to produce the products that's going to bring them the most revenue and profit first. Okay, so the large 6x6, the 8x8, the pergolas, all that stuff, log cabins, you name it. Those are the profit margins, and then we're down at the bottom. Okay, even though we think 1x6.6 is the primary, market for the Western red cedar mills, we're not. Okay, we're just a piece of the big puzzle. But let's talk about this. Okay, first and foremost, we all know that the lumber market demand is absolutely exploding. Okay, as a whole, right? And with that, we've seen a huge price increase. We know that it's inevitable when you got, demands are high, supplies are short. I'm going to go back and talk about why the supplies are short. Okay, I saw a couple of comments over here asking about meals. Right now, let's talk about delivery time. Right now, from peers in the industry that I've talked to, and I got 3 different friends that work in 3 different segments for 3 different suppliers. They've all told me they're averaging about 12 to 14 week delivery time on most, ready to ship out. And then you add the transportation demands on it, which is ending up being about a 16 to 20 week turnaround from the time it leaves the mill, gets on a truck, gets on a barge, or gets on a train, and it gets to a supplier's house. 16 to 20 weeks. I mean, that's just relevant. That's what we're seeing right now. Okay. If you look at the overall big picture, okay, again, wood fence is a small piece of that. And I saw a comment from one of the people here about mills shutting down. Yep. Mills are running as full a capacity as they can right now, but there's 2 things that's affecting them to produce more. The number one is they can't get logs, okay? If we can't cut trees and we can't get logs for our industry, then the mills can't cut it. That's the first challenge. That's what every one of my peers in the industry told me, Tony, every mill, whether it's a Western red cedar mill or a whitewood mill or whatever, these mills all over the country, they cannot get product fast enough to meet the demands. And then again, you put the pecking order in, we're down at the bottom. Sure. So that's number one. Number 2 is the labor shortage. We're a mill that could be, at a higher capacity of output, can't because they don't have enough manpower, and then you got to think about the mitigation. Maybe they can't get 6 foot apart, and all that kind of stuff, not getting political. Okay. Right. So what I want our industry to understand is our mills for the fencing industry is absolutely doing everything they can to get that product out their door and get it to us. But also they've got to put the priorities on all these other things before they cut that 1x6/6 or that 1x4/6 or whatever it may be. A lot of these Western red cedar mills actually shifted to a lot of white wood, product out there that helped mitigate some of the supply, especially if you're staining. That's a good thing. I mean, whitewood and or Western red cedar, both of them are going to last, especially after you seal and you stain. So understand that these guys are doing everything that they can. And here's where every one of them told me, okay, we talked about delivery time. Everybody knows that. Everybody says, well, Tony, when is this going to level off? Unless we see something drastically change within the next few months to the end of the year, you're not going to see a level off with production levels coming back to where we need them until probably the end of the second quarter of 2020 and possibly even into the first or the third quarter. Now, that's not Tony Thornton telling you that. That's 4 different industry experts that saying we're doing all that we can. We're ramping up log purchases. But the thing about it is all of these mills place an order to say, hey, I need this many board feet, I need this many logs, and now they've got that order, but they can't get any more because of the demands. Yeah. So it's just a domino effect of what's going on. So please don't get upset with, our manufacturers, our mills and suppliers. They're doing what they can to support us. But the Western red cedar and the pressure treated mills are dealing with all of the pre-sold products from earlier this year. So whatever's coming in later in the year, they can't even give you a time frame on delivery. It may be 6 months, it may be 9 months. We just don't know. So just take that into consideration. A couple of other points here is that cutting and supplying as fast as possible, but with such a high demand, hard to meet the expectations. And then you take the backlog that occurred with the COVID shutdown to where they could mitigate their plants and not being able to get logs to cut, that just adds more challenges on that.
Yeah, so they had the demand, plus they had back orders.
Absolutely. So the takeaway here is we know what the delivery times are.
Sure.
Hopefully we'll have some level off toward the middle of next year. Continue placing your orders. continue doing what you're doing. More and more people with this whole process begin buying truckloads rather than job lots.
Yep.
I think that's good. We've even talked at other segments. Joe, you and I even had a discussion about, co-op with some of your smaller companies in the market. If you can't buy a truckload, go with 5 or 6, companies that are like-minded, and y'all co-op an order to where you can get 2 truckloads. It works. I mean, I've seen it work. But they can't give you a deadline, a timeline on when the delivery and things are going to occur.
No, that's what we're seeing, Tony, is so we'll place an order for like 3 or 4 truckloads, and they say, well, we'll get them to you when we can. But if nothing else, it gets you in line, right?
Yes.
It gets you in that queue to say, I need 4 truckloads spaced out at least a month apart. And they say, well, that's fine. It's going to be more, more than a month apart. That's fine. That's fine. I just don't need 4 trucks showing up, next week.
Exactly.
But it gets you in their queue, right? It gets you in line.
And they're not going to ship you all at one time because they're allocating. Okay.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah.
The big suppliers that we know in our industry, they have certain allocations per month. They don't get anything over what this other guy doesn't get.
Well,
but what caused most of this, if we remember going back to COVID, was the retail sales at the box movers. Okay. Everybody's going down and they're buying this product, right? And they're buying this product, which puts a demand, and it challenges the supply. And then all of a sudden, again, let's think about it. Okay, the box movers, we know who they are. All right, they're all over the country. They're going to get the first deliveries before the fence guys get them. Okay, and you can put names on the side of those bunks of wood all day long. You know who the 4 primary guys are out there. And if you go to the box movers, I don't want to even name them. You understand that product's there, that product's there, that's product's. I said, a guy called me, they said, Tony, my local box mover has got, a yard full of, this product. Well, guess what? He buys more product than the fence industry does as a whole. So guess what? He got his product before us.
Well, and that's a nationwide company, right? So they have a national buyer that will go to the mill directly and say, we want 32 train car loads. And we want you to commit to that. You know what I mean? So so it stands to reason that they're going to have a little bit higher priority. Again, as a contractor, consider it. So you have one client that meets 25% of your yearly sales, right? So this is a big customer. They need a fence. And then you have a customer that maybe comes in once or twice a year, and they need a fence, and you can only build one. Which you prioritize.
Exactly.
Right? You prioritize the relationship that you've had for years, and you also recognize that they're a decent portion of your revenue. So you prioritize that project. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that is the correct business move.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Business is business at the end of the day, and that's what everybody's got to realize.
That's right. So
I've got some really good talking points here from a report that I received, and this is from March of this year. Okay, and here we are several months later.
Sure.
But the total North American lumber production in 2020 finished only 1% higher than 2019. Okay, so think about that in relative terms. In 2020, it only had 1% increase in the overall market from 2019. Now,
let's talk about
2019 was strong, and then we hit the COVID time, but yet it still maintained. Okay, it didn't decrease.
Exactly. That's the point. That's what the point I hear from that, Tony, is that they were shut down, depending on where they were located and all that. They were shut down for a period of time.
Yep.
And they still got over that. They still got over that hump and finished 1% higher.
Exactly.
I think that's significant.
I thought this was a very good point too, that the Canadian output was down 4% in 2020. Okay. And that's mainly due to, we don't think about it like this. I'm from Mississippi, and I see pine trees, on every street corner, right? And there's a beetle infestation that gets into these pine trees. And if the pine beetle, gets in these trees, it'll wipe out a forest, in 30 days. Well, what happened in Canada, it was called the mountain pine beetle infestation. And it absolutely destroyed their forest, which, again, if they can't get the logs to cut, the mills can't produce, the industry can't receive. So, we don't think about things like that affecting us, but it was on such a large scale that's relevant for us to understand. So hopefully I'm giving you some things to think about. It truly is all the pieces, all the building blocks, all the dominoes that goes into that thing, has an effect on the big picture.
Well, and that's Tony, that's significant. The Canadian production being down significant because the vast majority of Western red cedar that comes in the United States comes from Canada, is my understanding.
There, and of course our Pacific Northwest, our U.S. based Pacific Northwest supplies more Western red cedar with the Canadian market than anybody else. So U.S. base held and added 1%, but due to this infestation, the Canadian market was way down. Another couple of things I wanted to bring to the attention of the listeners was that, we as buyers, we the fence guys, get pretty frustrated in the inability to purchase enough lumber to keep things going. But at the end of the day, it all has to do with the labor shortages, okay, and raw material, logs. That's the two things that you need to keep in mind, okay? Now, it's hard to keep our current shifts fully staffed, as we've already talked about, and they can't add an additional staff or additional shift because of those two things. I don't have the labor and I don't have the raw material, okay? Yep. Now, I thought this was very, very, very specific. This is a gentleman that I know personally, okay, that basically said, Tony, I've been in this industry for 70 years. I've never seen anything like it in the wood market, okay? 70 plus years in the wood market, and he's saying, I've never seen anything like it. I don't know what to tell you. It just is what it is. Sure. And we've just got to wade the storm. Our fencing industry is one of the most resilient groups of people that, out there. We'll get through it. We'll find diversification. We'll find other methods. But at the end of the day, for a 70-year veteran that's been dealing with the wood market that says he's never seen anything like it, we're learning as an industry how to mitigate this and how to hopefully come out on the other end. Yeah. There's only one more piece that I want to add to this wood market, and then we'll get into your session of discussions and all.
Sure.
Like I talked about in the vinyl market, we also see a huge influx of imported cedar, okay? You call it what you want, all right? Sure. There's 3 products that's being introduced to the market. It's fast growth. It's fast growth on steroids, okay, to make that tree get up large enough to where they can cut it. They're putting it on a barge. They're shipping it over here. And at the end of the day, what you call, number 1, number 2, number 3 cedar, okay, which we think is the best, number 1 and number 2. I used to see some of this number 3. The wood market classifies as class A, B, and C, okay? Most of the products that's being imported to us right now are what you and I would consider a lesser than number 2, probably more of a number 3 product. So it's a class C product. And because it hasn't been in the market long enough for us to understand what is it going to do in 10 years, all I'm saying is you better not sit on that product very long, simply because you don't know what's going to happen with it, okay? Yep. The stories that I'm hearing is that there's been some failures with some of the products, not all the imported products, dealing with, what am I trying to say, blackwood or a fungus, that's developing. Right. And then that causes a lot of challenges with the staining especially, but, how do you get rid of it? But if you keep it stacked and you keep it wet, okay, it's eventually gonna have some problems. So all I'm saying to you, and these are the 4 peers in the industry that shared this with me, be careful with the imported product. Yeah, it's a fit, and all the import is trying to do is to capitalize on our shortage. Be patient. Our products are coming. Try to diversify, use vinyl, use composite, use something. But just don't get yourself in a bind, because your company's on the line. Your credibility's on the line. So,
yeah, and that's a conversation we've had here, at our company, is that there are other products available, but let's please keep in mind that we offer a lifetime warranty, right? So let's think about that. A lifetime is a pretty long time, and we're dealing with a product, to your point, that hasn't been in the market very long. We don't know how it's going to react. However, we do have a product in Western red cedar that we know how it's going to act. We know what to look for. We know what to talk to the customer about. Hey, here's what's normal. Here's what's abnormal. Here's what's covered. Here's what's not covered. That sort of thing. So Tony, here's again not doing in-depth research, but from what I've heard, so the weight of an item contributes to the cost of shipping it. So what's happening with some of the import products is they're getting dried out. So they're putting them through a kiln dried, to lose the water weight so that they're not paying to transport water. But what's happening is when they get into an environment that is humid and nailed up, before that board can acclimate, those boards pop. You get into the board swelling, which is kind of counter to what the guys that build wood every day, it's kind of counter to what we're used to seeing. We're used to telling the customer, hey, this can shrink typically up to 1/8 of an inch over time. Totally normal. Don't freak out. It's just the fact of how this wood works. But so now guys are thinking, okay, so we're used to butting these boards up as tight as we can get them, knowing that they're going to shrink. But the import boards don't shrink. They expand because they're absorbing this moisture, this free moisture in the air, what we would call humidity, and they're popping off the fences. So if you're going to use that product, one, you have to understand that you're using a product that doesn't have a track record in our market, in our environments. And two, you have to really rethink how you install it. Mm-hmm. If we would have to create a process that says, hey, maybe you have to gap these things 1/8 of an inch to allow for swelling or more. I don't know, but these are what I'm hearing. Either in email sent to me or comments in various videos, is that the import product comes in incredibly dry, and when it acclimates, it swells.
Yeah. And then with your point there, if you use a product that this is gonna occur, that adds labor time because they've got to put that little bit of gap in there. So now you're less efficient and your prices have got to go up on your labor. So again, prices are going out the ceiling.
Yeah, less panels installed, per hour or per day, however you want to track it. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it leads to a more expensive product anyway. So the money that you might have saved on the product likely gets paid back in some portion into labor. So
exactly.
Tony,
man, I see some good comments over here. These guys are flowing up over there.
I do too. I want one talking point I want to get into before we get to the comments is the fact that, so when we're talking about, you had said second to third quarter 2022, which let's understand that's a year from now, right?
Yeah.
So I think one of the contributing factors is you see these wholesalers stocking up on lumber. You see it, and they're buying it as fast as they can at whatever price they can get it at, right? So, and they're committing to, 32 train cars at X dollars per board to lock in price. The thing to consider is they've locked that price in, right? So
early this year, that's why they're getting product.
Sure. But the point I'm making here is, so say, fictitious numbers. Say they said, I'm going to pay $7 a board for the next 32 train cars, $7 a board. Well, those boards are going to keep coming at $7 per board. So you see comments and you hear people say, well, I don't understand why the price is so high at the box store. They've got these things piled up. Well, that's because they paid a certain price for it.
So
right?
let me interject input from my 4 experts. Okay. Yeah. They may have locked in that price at the first of the year, but due to all of the parameters that's going on right now, they're not buying that board at the same price. They're basically, it's not happening, Joe.
No, I don't. No,
in other words, it's just hypothetically, say a big box mover committed to 300, railroad truck, a railroad, cargo, and they contracted for $7. We'll hypothetically say that number. That is hypothetical, people. Okay.
Yes. That means nothing.
And now, as early in the year, they probably held to that contract, but now due to everything else that's going on, that may be $2 more, $3 more. And then you add all the shipping issue on top of that, we're going to talk about momentarily. So a lot of people think that because they're stockpiling this stuff, they're still buying it at the same price. They aren't. It had to change. It had to change because they can't even produce the product for that cost. And whether a contract's in place or not, And this is every segment of our market. Every peer that I talked to said that the guaranteed price is early. Their slot, their locked in order is there, but the price is not locked in. It's changing every time. It could change this month to when they ship 30 cars next month. It may change, and then 30 days later it'll change again.
Sure. No, and so the point I was making though is when they buy a board, they lock their price in when they bought whatever price they bought that at, right? So my point was that moving forward, the prices can't come down until that inventory is sold, right? Irregardless, if they have a magical lot that's filled with lumber that they paid whatever $7 a board, fictitious number for, they can't sell that board for less until they sell this lot of lumber out, right? And again, just putting it back onto the contractor's perspective, we're sitting on a couple loads of lumber right now. If the price of wood dropped to half tomorrow, I couldn't sell these boards for half. My cost is locked in on these boards. I'm going to have to sell them for what they, I have my number, right? My markup and my retail price.
Your margin, right.
I have to sell it for that retail price until I reorder, and then I can drop the price. Right. And I think that's going to contribute to how quickly the prices fall, because there's several steps in the process, right? Like, contractors don't buy directly from the mill. There's at least one step in between. There's usually two steps in between.
Exactly.
So you have to wait for the price to fall in each step before you can start realizing it on your end. And I say that because I know where this conversation is going, 6 months from now, a year from now, saying, now, wait a minute. The mills are producing cheap lumber again, or I don't think we'll ever see cheap lumber, but less expensive lumber. Why am I still getting charged this price?
Yeah.
You're going to have to wait for that price to flow through that supply chain before it gets to you. That's really the only point I was trying to make.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Because I know it's one of those things, like I see both sides of the coin, the contractor, and I see a little bit on not really your perspective, but someone that's reporting on, just industry topics. So you kind of see both points where me as a business owner, I say, I want a decrease in price and I want it now. But then you also have to consider like, well, yeah, but please keep in mind, these people are running a business too.
Yeah.
So, excuse me, if I'm a wholesaler, I have to sell through my inventory at whatever price I paid for it before I can move on to a new price point. Sorry, I got a little bit dry-throated on that one.
Hey, you're good. You're good. But, hey, you're drinking out of that plastic cup over there.
I know it. Plastic everything. You know what I mean? It's all plastic. Well, Tony, I think that wraps up pretty well the subject of wood. Do you have anything else you'd like to add to it?
No, I think that's the high points. Again, we know what the delivery times are. We kind of know what hopefully the level off time frames will be, hopefully sooner than that. Yeah. But it all has to do with the raw material being logs to get to the mills, and then the labor shortages, and then we add the transportation, which we'll talk about shortly. So
one more point I just kind of had it off the top of my head. So talking about, because I see it in the comments, and we might as well bring it up about mills that were shut down, in 2019, pre-pandemic. They were shut down ahead of the pandemic. Well, why don't we just start those mills back up? One of the problems we're having on the install side of my business is we're trying to add crews, right? We're trying to add manpower. The labor force isn't there for that. Like it just isn't. And you can talk about whatever contributing factor you want to, whether it's whatever you think the contributing factor is. I'm talking about the end result being the labor force isn't there. Not right now.
Right.
So
go up all the way.
That's the thing is, okay, so if I can't start a crew of 4 people, what are the chances I can start a sawmill that requires however many, a couple hundred people?
Right.
Probably not good, right? And, does it stink that those sawmills were shut down? Absolutely does.
And I do want to take up a little bit for, some of those guys that bought some of those mills. Acquisitions go on every day. We see it and hear about it. We read it in all type of news media. But at the end of the day, a lot of those mills were old and couldn't meet the production levels that needed to be met.
Yeah.
So when the new acquisition came in and says, okay, can I keep up this level of production? Well, first of all, they're challenged with getting logs. Even back in 19, there was still a challenge then.
Yep.
We heard the infestation issue in Canada, which proves that point even more. And then, it was going to cost too much to ramp up that mill to a standard that could meet the production levels needed. And then pandemic hit. And then, we're not even going to consider it. Okay.
Right.
So do we personally, do I see potentially new mills, evolving? It all has to do with raw material. Can I get logs? If I can get logs, I can put mills online. If I don't have logs, I can't put mills online, whether they're already in place or whether I need to do a startup. Even if these mills were started up today, guys, I want this point to be made. If I had 5 more mills, if we as an industry had 5 more mills right now, you wouldn't be getting any more product because there's so many trees out there. Okay.
Yeah.
So the delivery on the trees is the issue. So whether we had 5, 6, or even 10 more mills, you wouldn't ramp up any more production because it's limited resource of raw material being
right. It's a supply issue, both in raw material and labor is a supply also.
Yeah.
So you're going to have labor issues. I saw that, but I think that's relevant to talk about. I really do.
Absolutely. Very good point. Very good point.
Listen, I was one of the fence guys in 19 going, oh, okay, so you shut down however many, 2, 3, 4 mills, and the price of your boards went up. Those two things seem related, but it all depends on perspective. If you look at the flip side of the coin, they're saying, okay, yes, we acquired 10 mills, we closed down the 2, 3, 4, lowest producing or negative producing mills to try to help our efficiencies over the rest of the mills.
Absolutely. It goes back to that margin thing you were talking about earlier. At the end of the day, every business has got to make a dollar. We got to figure it out.
You look at a profit and loss statement. Where am I making money? Where am I losing money? And let's try to cut out that money loss.
Yep.
Well, Tony, I think that wraps up our wood segment, I do believe. Very good.
Now, guys, as I said in the beginning, this is a multi-part series. We took about a 3-hour live interview and cut it into separate snippets and categories for different styles of fence. If you haven't watched the other videos, be sure to watch them now. And also, if you found this content helpful or educational, please consider giving a like. It really helps our channel, and it's absolutely free on your end. But for now, I'm Joe Everest, the fence expert, reminding you that good fences make good neighbors. And we'll see you next time.